or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Rick. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic.
Thanks for being here. Rick, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, my name's Rick. I'm 52 years old. I'm married, have 2 children. I live in Central Florida. I'm a semi-retired now software engineer for Siemens. I'm former U.S. Army 82nd Airborne for 8 years, and that's pretty much it.
Thanks for your service to our country.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Rick, how much time did you spend in the woods before you had your encounter?
Oh, I grew up hunting, Vic. From the time I was old enough to carry a gun, I grew up deer hunting, squirrel hunting, rabbit hunting as a small child, and advanced into the larger game as I got older. All my life, every chance I had to get into the woods to hunt, fish, camp, you name it, hiking, we were out there. And living in Florida and the weather's always good down here, we spend a lot of time out hiking and hunting and camping.
Well, it goes without saying you're definitely no stranger to the woods.
Oh, no, I spent probably most of my youth out in the woods, so, I was very, very familiar with them.
Sure sounds like it. What was your take on the existence of cryptids before that dogman came after you that day?
I never really had any interest in them. I'd heard of Bigfoot and stuff. I really didn't think anything about it. I didn't follow them. I'd never even heard of what a dogman was. I'd never heard of a dogman at all until I'd heard of your show. But I didn't follow that kind of stuff. I was more into the sports and music and stuff like that. I wasn't really interested in cryptids.
Well, that doesn't make you any different from most people. The Daniel Boone National Forest is where your encounter happened. What can you tell us about the park?
Well, it's a very large park in southeastern Kentucky. The Cumberland River actually runs through it. And the area where I was at, it's very densely forested, very rocky and hilly, coming off the Appalachian Mountains there. And it's got several river areas that run through it, but it's extremely thick and overgrown in most places.
Yeah, that is a big park. Your encounter is not the only dogman encounter I've heard of that happened in that park, by the way. Did you know that other encounters have happened there?
No, sir, I did not. That's the first I've heard of it. I did recently hear about some incidents in the Land Between the Lakes area over on the western side. But as far as Daniel Boone, I'd never heard of anyone else seeing anything there. But I'm not surprised. After what I saw, anything's possible.
Oh, I'd say so. Considering that the Daniel Boone is in Kentucky, why did you decide to go there, considering you lived in Florida at the time?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I actually had been invited there by my uncle because I had been put on a trial about a month earlier. And it was a murder trial. And after the trial, I was pretty depressed and everything. And so he happened to be down from Kentucky because he's from Lexington. He had been down visiting family with us down there, and he asked if I wanted to come up with him, and he was going on a fishing trip there off of what's called the Rock Castle River there in the Daniel Boone Forest. They like to go up there in early March before all the kayakers get out on the river because the Rock Castle is pretty famous for whitewater. And they like to get out there because the smallmouth bass is really good up there supposedly that time of year. At that time, I would jump at a chance to go fishing anyway. So I told him I'd join him, and that's how I wound up going up there.
Yeah, sounds to me like you needed a vacation.
Absolutely.
Before you tell us about your encounter, please tell us about the area of the park where you had it.
Okay, where we were at was, like I said, we were on what's called the Rock Castle River, which comes down from the north, and it eventually runs into the Cumberland River there. We were probably about 2 miles north of the Cumberland River on the Rock Castle, on an area where there's a high-tension power line that comes across. And we were on the east side of the Rock Castle, and the power line comes and crosses the Rock Castle and carries on. So they have the wooded area because it's very thick and hilly in there and rocky. And the area is cleared out for the power lines, and they have like a road that you can ride down on either side, what we call a rut road. It's like the 2 rut lane roads that you can get in the woods that drives along on each side for maintenance on the power lines. And where we were at, down by the river, there's like a bluff there where the river has washed out the rock. And we were parked, actually camped there on the top of the bluff. And then there's a trail that goes down to the river, and there's a bank there. And we were going to fish off the bank there where the power line comes across.
I see. All right, Rick, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, well, I'm going to start, Vic, with how I wound up going up there in the first place. Because to me, that's part of the story. What had happened was, I'm an engineer, and at the time, I was doing software engineering installation for telephone systems all around the country. So I was rarely home. And because I'm rarely home, I didn't stay up with current events. And apparently, there was this young man from Owensboro, Kentucky, that had come down to Central Florida, down there where I live. And he had this vampire cult. And his name was Rod. I don't want to give his full name, but it was actually a fairly famous trial. This young man led a bunch of high school children in a vampire cult. And he came down to this small town where I live and had recruited several of the high school kids there to be in his vampire cult, where they would literally drink each other's blood and initiate each other into this cult. But anyway, this one young girl that he had recruited into his club wanted to get away from home. She was a very young little girl. And she said she couldn't get away from her parents. So he apparently went in and he murdered the two parents with an accomplice of his in his cult there. They bludgeoned the parents to death and stole their vehicle and took off out of Florida where they were captured. When I got home, this had already gone down. I didn't know anything about it. So I wound up getting impaneled on the jury of the trial for this young man. And after having to witness all the brutality and these children that grew up in this small town that I grew up in that were into witchcraft and Satan worship and reading the Necronomicon book and following the spells in it and stuff like that, really had me upset. And I was just very, very surprised that this was going on in my hometown, my very small hometown. So my uncle, like I said, was down visiting our family at the time, and he had planned a fishing trip in Kentucky. And so he asked me if I'd like to go to kind of get my mind off things. And my wife thought it was a wonderful idea because she could tell how depressed I was. And so I decided, yeah, he said, we'll spend a week up there. We'll just take it easy and just forget about everything. And I thought it was a great idea. So I packed up my stuff and off we went to Kentucky. We got to the Daniel Boone National Forest. We actually went to his home in Lexington first, packed up some gear, and then he drove us in his truck. I followed him up in my car, and then he drove us in his truck out to this area, it took us over 6 hours to get to this area. It's very densely forested. It's way back. He said it's so far back they have to pump the sunlight in. But it's way, way back in the woods. There's really no civilization out there. I didn't see a home for half an hour. But anyway, we finally got there. It was almost dark by the time we got there. So we decided we would camp that night there on the bluff. And then in the morning, we would start carrying all our gear down to the shore there by the rock castle to start fishing. We both woke up about sunrise the next morning. And when we first got out of the truck, I noticed at the time it was very cold, but not windy. It was a crystal clear day. This is early March 1998. It was very bright and sunny, but it was pretty chilly out. But there wasn't a bird chirping. There was no noise whatsoever coming out of the woods. It was dead silent. So we started grabbing our gear, and you get this feeling like you're being watched. But from the years I spent in the military, that third eye wakes up, and you start feeling like you're being watched, and you start looking over your shoulder, but you don't really see anything. We kind of shook it off, and he and I started carrying our gear down to the shoreline of the rock castle. And we got some chairs down and some bait and stuff, and we had guns with us. We actually carried guns because there are supposedly bear in that area, although I've never seen any or heard of any in there. He said they're in there. So I actually had a sidearm, a 357 Magnum. He had a 44 Magnum. And I had a 30-06 rifle, and he had a 12-gauge shotgun. We carried all that down, and we were just get set up fishing. We heard something in the woods sounded like it was walking, but it was making quite a bit of noise. And it would snap limbs, and it sounded like it might be bipedal. We weren't quite sure. But, sorry, Vic, this thing, we kept looking over our shoulders, and we kept hearing leaves and twigs breaking behind us, limbs snapping, and like something was walking around behind us off to our left. And then just out of nowhere, this thing bounded out of the woods. It probably jumped 20 feet onto the shoreline looking right at us. Now, it was on all fours at the time when it bounded out, and it was looking at us, and I can't even describe. This thing was absolutely massive. It was huge, every bit of over 400 pounds, 400 to 500 pounds at least. It was huge. And I thought at first it was a bear, but in my mind, I was frozen. I couldn't move. And my uncle was standing behind me. I couldn't see him, and I didn't know what he was doing, but I knew I was frozen solid. I could not move. And then this thing began to stand up on its hind legs. And when it stood up, it made this, I can't describe this noise it made when it stood up. It's kind of like large knuckles cracking and air escaping at the same time. And this thing, it must have been 8 feet tall when it stood up. And it was solid jet black. Its fur actually looked well groomed. It was solid jet black. It had ears on the top of its head that were narrow, long, and pointed with tufts at the top, kind of like a bobcat has. It had a very large, broad head with a very long snout, but wide snout, and a mouthful of teeth like I've never seen on anything. And every single one of its teeth were sharp. And it was kind of hunched over, and I don't know if the hair around its shoulders and its back was thicker and longer, or if it was just standing up on its back or what, but it came down to some really broad cannonball type shoulders. It looked human. And this thing had long arms. They were extremely muscular. It came down into hands that looked like massive raccoon hands or claws, and it had long nails on it. They reminded me of a raccoon, but just huge. And it had a very thick, broad body and chest that would put any bodybuilder to shame. And it went down to very powerful, strong legs in the thighs. And then the lower legs were like dogs' legs. They were hawks that bend backwards. And this thing kind of hunched over like it was going to pounce, and its ears laid back on its head. And it began to growl this growl that when it growled, your whole body just shook. I mean, you could feel it through your chest, and like I said, I was frozen. I could not move. And right at that time, I heard this incredible, loud boom over my head. And apparently my uncle had pulled his .44 and fired this thing over its head. And this thing did a backward somersault from where it was at in the air over into the woods and bolted out. And as soon as it did, he and I hauled tail up the bluff to the truck. We left there's maybe still stuff sitting there. I don't know. We left our chairs there. We just grabbed our guns and our poles and booked it back up the bluff. Got to the truck, just threw our guns in the back and took off. And we no more than took off, and that thing bounded out of the woods on the other side of the power line. And we were flying down this power line, hitting bumps and potholes, and stuff was flying out of the back of the truck. And this thing was right on our tail the entire time. And as soon as we hit the hard road, he floored it. And this thing stayed with this truck. I don't know how fast he was going because I was physically getting sick from it. But it followed us. We had to be doing every bit of 60 miles an hour, and this thing was still with us on our rear quarter, the right rear quarter. And finally, it either tired or just got tired of chasing us and veered off and went back into the woods. And we didn't talk about it at all the way home. I got like I said, I got physically sick and had to vomit outside the truck. And I have never been so scared in my life, Vic. Like I said, I did 3 tours of combat and never had that kind of fear go through me, and had never froze in fear like that. Over and over, I thought in my mind, we got to the house. He got out of the truck. I got out. I threw my stuff in my car, and I pointed it towards Florida, and I came straight home. I didn't even slow down. All I stopped for was gas. And all the way home, I thought about the irony is I left Florida to get away from vampires, only to run into werewolves in Kentucky. But anyways, that's pretty much what happened, Vic. That's my story.
When it came out of the woods, was it closer to you or your uncle?
It was pretty much even with us. It was down the bank. It was south of us. I wouldn't say more than 40 yards at the most. And my uncle, like I said, he was standing behind me, almost directly behind me. And it was the equal distance from both of us. It's just, I couldn't see him, and I was so angry when he fired that pistol. I did not want to, I honestly, with all the firearms we had, I don't think we could have touched it.
Who did it seem to focus on more?
Well, it looked like it was looking at me, but that could have just been me thinking that. I don't really know. You know, it just looked angry. It looked angry that we were there. I don't know if we came in during its feeding or if it had children nearby, although this was a male. I know that for sure. But honestly, I don't know.
Well, I think more than likely you two were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. Was there a particular physical feature it had that upset you most?
Other than the fact that this thing was huge, those hands, I've never seen an animal with hands like that except for a raccoon. And I've certainly never seen a dog or a wolf. Well, I thought it was a werewolf at the time. But this thing had hands. It had hands and arms. It didn't have paws. And it had a human-type torso on it with the same muscular build and everything like humans have. But I'd have to say probably the teeth were the most intimidating thing it had.
Yeah, I can understand that. Looking back, do any of the thoughts that were going through your head at the time when you were standing there looking at that dog man strike you as being strange now?
No, I can't remember having any thoughts except get the heck out of here. I just wanted to get away, Vic. Like it was the most frightening thing that's ever happened to me. I've never been so scared in my life.
Oh, I'm sure. Did you notice any foul scents when it came after you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. It had a horrible stink to it. It had a rotten, dead animal meat smell to it, like roadkill that had been sitting in the sun for 3 or 4 days. It was horrible, horrible. And I'll have nightmares, and I'll smell that smell. And this is almost 20 years later, and I still think about it. And it was absolutely, I think that's part of the reason I got so sick, was that rancid smell this thing had. If you see one of these things, it will leave an impression on you. I guarantee it, Vic. It's just an unbelievable sight. Like I said, it's just massively huge. This thing is, you grow up your whole life thinking one way and thinking, your parents will tell you as you're growing up, monsters don't exist. Well, trust me, they do.
That they do. At least you know the truth about that now.
Yes.
Did you see if it had a tail?
Yes, it did. It wasn't a very long tail for the size of the animal. It was a fairly short, kind of fluffy type tail, probably about the length of his thigh, maybe. But yeah, it did have a tail.
Since it was a canine-type dogman, I expected it to, but just to be thorough, I thought I'd ask you about that. Did it seem to be more clumsy on two legs than it was on all fours?
It did a somersault backwards into the woods off two legs, Vic. This thing was, I don't think it mattered if it was on two or four legs. This thing was so nimble and so quick, yet so big. I don't think even if we'd have thrown down on it with those guns, we could have got a shot off.
You're probably right. How tall do you think it was on all fours?
Oh, goodness. Probably up to my shoulders high. It's probably a good 4.5, 5 feet tall at the back. It kind of stood at a slope, kind of like a hyena does, with its rear legs seeming shorter because its front arms seem longer. So between 4.5, 5 feet at the back.
Yeah, that is big. Please tell us more about what happened after you left the Daniel Boone, such as, did you call anyone on the way home to share that experience with them?
No, at the time, I didn't even talk about it. Like I say, I didn't have a phone with me. You know, of course, back then, cell phones weren't near as prevalent, but I didn't have a phone with me on the way, and I didn't really talk about it and not even my uncle, all the way up to his house with him. And then after I left and headed home, I didn't talk to anybody about it or say anything until I got home and talked to my wife.
When you finally did make it home, did you do anything in particular to try and deal with that experience?
Well, for weeks and weeks afterward, I had nightmares, and I had told my wife about it, and she was very supportive, and she believed me. She believed everything I was telling her. She knew I was upset, and she knows when I'm upset, and she knew that this really had traumatized me. And, I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit I was bawling my eyes out. And she fully understood. And I would wake up sometimes at night with her holding me, saying I was screaming at night and just pouring sweat. And like I said, I could smell that smell. It was weeks after that before the nightmares started going away. And I actually was able to deal with it. But I did a little research, trying to research werewolves, you know, and I'd never done any kind of cryptid research in my life. And the internet wasn't much. There was some dial-up out there, but there wasn't much on it. And you couldn't really find anything out. This is 1998. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of information. Now, I did find out some things a few hundred years ago in France and in Germany. And I had read about the Rougarou in Louisiana. But as far as werewolves, that was stuff that was in movies. These things didn't exist for real, not that I thought. So I really didn't know who to talk to or who to go to about it. I mean, who do you go to and say, hey, I saw a real-life werewolf the other day? They're going to look at you like you flipped your nut.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Like you just said, you spent almost 20 years thinking you were the only person in the world to have a dogman encounter. How did it feel when you finally found out so many other people had seen them too?
Well, much as I hate to say it, Vic, it was a huge relief, actually. You think you're the only one out there that's ever seen this thing. And I had a million things going through my mind. You know, I tried to convince myself over and over it wasn't what I saw, that I'd mistaken it for a bear. And had my uncle not been with me at the time, I probably would have been able to convince myself that I had seen something else, because you just don't believe these things exist. And so I'm sorry, it's very hard to concentrate on that, Vic. It's just thinking about it gets me so upset. But finding out that other people knew about it was a huge relief for me. And then it's only been recently I even heard Lord Dogman. A good friend of mine actually told me about the show. Now, I had told him about my encounter very recently, actually, and I've known him since the 70s. And he said, sounds like you saw a dog man. And I didn't know what a dog man was. And he told me about your show. And I guess they listened to it where he works. And I listened to a couple of shows. I said, that's exactly what I saw. So to find out that there are other people that I can converse with, that there are others who have been through what I've been through and seen what I've seen, is a huge relief. Although I wouldn't want anyone to ever have this experience, and I certainly don't understand anybody that wants to go out and look for these things.
That is pretty hard to understand. I agree. When you're in the 82nd Airborne, how did the fear you felt while in combat compare to what you felt that day when the dogman was coming after you?
Okay, well, in combat, first off, training kicks in immediately. I was in combat 3 times. I was in Grenada, I went to Panama, and then I was in Desert Storm. Now, I was with the 325th PIR of the 82nd Airborne, what they call the Falcon Brigades, and you prepare daily, every single day for combat. That's your job, it's what you do. Not that it is frightening and not that, those bullets start going over your head. It's scary, but it's something you expect. When something like this jumps out and you've got no defense against it, none whatsoever, you know you can't defend against it. And it completely is against anything you believe, then that's a whole different situation. Like I said, I've never been that frightened where I've been frozen in fear. I could not move until that 44 Magnum went off over my head.
Even if you know something like that's coming, you're still never going to be prepared for it. Considering your expertise with firearms, how much gun do you think you would have needed that day to safely confront that dogman?
Well, I'd start with an M1A1 Abrams tank, I think. Honestly, Vic, I know we didn't have the firepower to take it down. And, I was carrying a 30-06 and a 357. He's carrying a 12 gauge with triple-aught box and a 44 Magnum, and I wouldn't have tried to take it on with those.
Yeah, a lot of people have tried taking dogmen down with more formidable weaponry than that and failed, so it's good you realize that. Please tell us about how you were before your encounter versus how you are now after it.
Well, like I said, I grew up hunting, fishing, camping, spent probably half my childhood in the woods. I come from a long family of hunters. Never thought about anything in the woods that was dangerous. I knew there were bears and stuff like that out there, but I had the firepower to take care of them. I don't go hunting or camping or fishing anymore. And I'll fish, but it'll be on a lake that's around the town. I won't go in the woods. I don't camp. I stay on the hard road and don't even drive in the woods.
You've already talked about expected side effects, but have you suffered any unexpected side effects because of that encounter?
Just how it changed my lifestyle. That's about the only unexpected is how much it changed my lifestyle, because of the fact that I absolutely do not spend any time in the woods. Whether it's alone or with a group of 10 people, it wouldn't matter for me, because 10 people aren't going to take this thing down.
Not only do I hate dogmen, I really hate what they do to people. Here you've got a man who just loved spending time out in the woods. Now, because of that experience with that dogman, you can't do what you used to love doing. So it really is such a shame.
Yeah, I think I ruined it for my children too, Vic, because growing up, I have a son who's now in college studying to be an engineer, and he won't go anywhere near the woods because I've always told him, stay out of the woods. There's things in there you don't know about. I've never elaborated because I never talked to him about it. I've only talked to my wife about it, and then recently my friend. But, I've always warned him and my daughter, stay away from the woods. There's things out there you just don't know. And it absolutely wrecked any kind of enjoyment I have for the woods.
Yeah, that really is a shame. Do you think you might tell your kids about what happened to you that day eventually?
I do believe I will. I probably am going to talk to my son about it here pretty soon. I don't worry about him going into the woods. He won't go because I guess I've scared him out of them, but he's a city boy anyways. He lives in the city, and I doubt he'll do any camping or anything like that in the woods anyway because I had scared him off. But I do plan on talking to him about it soon because the show mainly, I've discovered that talking about it actually helps. And that's a wonderful thing, Vic. It's a very unique thing you've got going here. It really is a big relief to be able to talk about it. Because even after 20 years, I started having nightmares again about it as soon as I started talking about it. But it makes it so much easier. And then knowing that there are so many others out there who have had the same experience I had. And finding out how they're dealing with it and sharing those experiences with each other and knowing that you're not the only one out there and that you're not crazy. And I think a big part of it is being able to talk to somebody about it. Because like I said before, you couldn't tell anybody. If I'd have said 1998, if I'd have told somebody that I saw a werewolf, they'd have looked at me like I was crazy.
Oh, sure they would have.
and your show is very unique in that it actually allows people to talk about their experience and let others hear their experience and share their experience and know that you're not the only one out there and know you're not crazy. These things really do exist.
Misery does love company, and when you find out that so many other people out there have gone through the exact same thing that you went through, it does help a lot. Now that you've seen one, what do you think dogmen are?
Well, when I first saw it, a million things went through my mind, from trying to pawn it off as something else, and try to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. Because it was broad daylight. There was no full moon out. So you think werewolf, but that's not when they're supposed to be out. And you think, well, is this some kind of mutated wolf? Is this some kind of mutated bear? This was around the Dolly the sheep time when they cloned the sheep. You think, did some government agency do some kind of crazy genetic experiment and create these things? You don't know what it is. So finding out that these are actually living, breathing animals that exist out there, but they're very secretive. And for some reason, our government doesn't want to acknowledge they exist. But they do exist. And knowing they're real, flesh and blood, they're not really supernatural that I could tell. And most people say that they're just living, breathing animals that are out there. We just don't see them that much. Someone had said one time that now that you've seen them, you can see them. When you know they exist, you can see they're out there.
In a lot of ways, I think it is a matter of the fact that you're looking for them makes you a lot more likely to see them. Maybe there's more to it than that, but we really don't know. Between you and your uncle, who had a harder time dealing with that experience?
I honestly think I did. I was thinking about it after I talked to you the other day, and I had remembered him, and it didn't register with me at the time because I didn't know what he was talking about. But after recently finding out more about these sightings in Kentucky, he had actually said something. That's what happened at the LBL. I didn't know what the LBL was at the time, but now I know it's the Land Between the Lakes area, and I guess there's been some pretty bad sights. So he must have known that these things were up there already, or something was up there already. But he seemed to deal with it. Unfortunately, he's passed away. He passed away several years ago. But I think that probably he dealt with it a lot better than I did. Of course, he was several years older than me, but he seemed to deal with it a lot better than I did. Like I said, we didn't talk about it a whole lot, but he didn't seem to lose any sleep over it. I certainly did. I don't know if he had nightmares. He never told me he did, but I know I did for a long time. So to be honest, I would have to say probably me. I had a much harder time dealing with it because it just wrecks your entire paradigm. Everything you believe that you've been taught, that you know from the time you're born till you have the experience, it's gone. Everything's completely changed, and you've got to completely change your mindset.
Yeah, it's funny how it has a tendency of doing that. Speaking of the sightings in Kentucky, did you know that they've also been seen in Florida?
I do now. Though, honestly, I didn't know anything about there being dogmen in Florida. Now, I spent, like I said, my entire youth in the woods here in Florida. I've never seen anything like that here. I had several bobcat encounters and Florida panther encounters, even saw a black panther in the wild, which is extremely rare. Lots of black bear, bobcats, stuff like that. But I've never, ever even seen a track from one of these things out there. So to find out they're here, that's even more reason for me to stay home.
Oh, I'd say it is. Before you saw that dogman, did you like to watch werewolf movies? And if so, did that change after you had that encounter?
I never watched them. I was never into the horror films and stuff like that before. I think actually I watched them more afterwards. I certainly did watch to see if I saw anything Hollywood was doing that's close to what I saw. And I did. In that movie Van Helsing, that one at the end, that big black one at the end was very close. If the body had been thicker on that one, the one I saw, it was very similar to that one from Van Helsing at the end, but it had a thicker body, just as muscular, but a lot thicker. The head was very similar to that one. Jody Cook has one of his books about werewolves, and there's a picture of a brown werewolf head on that book cover. And that is almost exactly the head of the one I saw, with the ears a little more pointed on the top. with little tufts of hair at the top like a bobcat. But this was very similar. But that one on Van Helsing at the end, the big black one, that was pretty close to the one I saw.
Yeah, that's not the kind of creature you want to run into in the woods, that's for sure. Well, Rick, it's about time for us to get out of here. Before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for the show, Vic. It's a wonderful show, and it really is a lot of help in putting us in touch with one another, letting us know that we're not alone, that we don't have to go through this alone. And now I just want to let anybody out there that doubts these things are real. Believe me, they're real. And whatever you do, do not go looking for them, because you can't outmatch them. They're a formidable beast. They're obviously living, breathing flesh, and they have to eat. So if you do go looking for them, go with a group and be very careful. But thanks a lot, Vic. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again for your time and coming on and telling us about that experience. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Vic.
Have a great night, okay?
You too, Vic. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Almost all of you are going to recognize tonight's guest. Of course, I'm talking about Josh Turner. Josh, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Vic.
Thanks for coming back. Josh, for the listeners who haven't heard you on prior episodes, please tell them about yourself.
Well, I guess there's not much to tell. I mean, I own a security company. I run it. I have a business partner. Been doing it for 12 years. I like to collect stories about a lot of different subjects, paranormal, in particular Dogman, because I had a Dogman encounter. And if anybody knows, it was on episode 55. That was my first time on your show. And that's pretty much it.
For anyone listening to the show tonight who hasn't had the privilege of listening to Josh before, you're definitely in for a treat. You shared some great news with me about an eyewitness you've met because of the show. Please expand on that for us.
There was a girl that reached out to me from California, and she told me about her encounter, and we ended up talking every day. This was back in February. Started dating, and now we are seeing each other, and she's moved to Austin, and we are together. So that's pretty cool. And it was all because of the Dogman thing that we actually started going out, because when she first told me her story, she didn't think that I would believe her. And I'm going like, are you kidding me? All the stories that I've gotten from people over the years. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And I appreciate that, Vic. I thank you for that, because I'm engaged.
Well, you're welcome. Congrats on that. For those of us who can't get enough of your stories, you've got more good news to share. Please tell us more about that.
Well, I'm actually getting together with a friend of mine. His name's Armando Salazar. He was a BFRO member. I don't know if he still is, but I know he was. And we are putting together a show. He's in the process of moving up here to Austin from Houston. And he's a retired ex-military, really good guy. I get along with him very well. And we've been kicking around the idea for the past year or so about putting together a show, but now we're in the process of moving it along so that we can get it started. And he's been working on it, getting equipment, and it's going to be about the paranormal. And I appreciate you giving me a platform to get started in this, because it was never an intention of mine to do this, to have a show or anything like that. But especially after coming on to your show, I got so many reports and so many people that wanted me to tell their story. So I thought, man, this is probably a good idea, because over the years, like I told you, when I would talk to somebody, anybody, especially doing security work overnight, you meet all kinds of people, especially night people. I asked them if anything strange or weird or odd has ever happened to them. And inevitably, if you ask enough people enough times, you'll get a hit. And sure enough, man, there's a lot of people out there who've had a lot of strange paranormal stuff happen to them. And that's what my show is going to be about. It's going to be paranormal. It's not going to be just Dogman. So anybody out there who listens to the show, if you've had a ghost encounter or if you've had any kind of anything, if you want to give me your story, maybe we can get it on there. Maybe we can interview you on the show. It's going to be a pretty open show. We're going to do some interviewing and we're going to do some storying. And that's pretty much it. I'm also in the process of writing a book. I've only gotten through the first chapter so far because I really don't know. There's so many stories that I got. I don't know how to put them all together, but I'm trying to get it together so I can have it for posterity. Something ever happens to me, at least it's recorded and it's in a book and everything, because there's so many stories in my head. My girlfriend's like, you really got to get these stories out of your head and put them onto paper so that something ever happens to you, there's a record there. That was the main reason I reached out to you, because I was convinced by other people that, dude, you have an encounter that happened to you and you have a lot of stories that you've collected since then. Because my thing is, I'm kind of OCD. I've always been that way. And after what happened to me, I wanted answers. So anybody who had anything, any kind of information about these things, I gobbled it up. And I tried to piece together and figure out what this phenomena is. Because this is a strange phenomenon. I've heard a story out of Bulawayo, Africa, about the Dogman. That, if anybody knows, used to be Rhodesia, it's now Zimbabwe. And there was a guy that told me a story about his village of a Dogman. It wasn't a hyena, it was a Dogman. And you gotta wonder, there are no wolves in Africa. So what is this? What is this phenomena? The story was just a tale. It wasn't like an encounter or anything. He just said there was a story about a werewolf type creature that was harassing people and killing goats on the outskirts of Bulawayo. And when you think about it, you got to wonder, this thing is a worldwide phenomenon. And it's just weird. What is it we're seeing? What are these people seeing? What are we seeing? I don't know. But I thank God that you would have a show that gives people a platform that can talk about this. Well, I want to do the same thing. There's a lot of shows out there, and I'm not taking away from anybody else. I don't want to just be another show. I want to do the same thing, but with paranormal. Give people a chance, hear the stories. Some people can come on and tell the stories. I just want people to know that the planet we're on is not just the normal, everyday, mundane world that we live in. I really believe that the world that we live in is a haunted planet. There's a lot of things out there. And a lot of it I can focus on is Texas, because most of the stories I got are from Texas. Texas is a big state, and we have a little bit of everything here in Texas.
You being the way you are, I know your show's going to do big things, but there is one side of this whole podcasting thing that you probably haven't thought about. Once you start making shows and the word gets out about your show, are you prepared for all the strange messages? For example, there's nothing like when someone sends you a message and they ask you if you want to see a picture of their toenail clipping collection. You know, there's nothing like that. Hey, Vic, you want to see my toenail clipping collection? Yeah, you just wait till they start coming in on you.
I've already had a few of, not toenail collections, but I've had a few. So like I told you before, there was a guy in Pennsylvania that was like, I'm a werewolf. And he kept messaging me, and he was going to send us a video of himself transforming. So me and my brother and my buddy were on the edge of our seats waiting for this transformation. And it's just him, like, he runs off the screen. You know, you're like, what the? Like, what? And you're just like, well, it could have been worse. He could have gotten nude or something and ran around. You know, it could have been worse. And you're just like, wow, you know, it's crazy some of the stuff that people come up with. You know, you get some odd ducks out there. And I've had some people get really miffed at me and start saying stuff. And, you know, and there's people that aren't fans that don't like me. They just think I'm full of crap. Whatever. That's their opinion. You know, I know the truth and I know what I know. And I'm sure you deal with it way, way more because this isn't my livelihood. This isn't something I do all the time. You know, it's just a side thing, you know, and if it turns into something, well, yeah, it's great.
Oh, I know you're going to do really well at it. With what you just said about people listening to the show getting miffed at you, that makes me think of another topic I want to ask you about. There's a misunderstanding about you that seems to persist. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
One thing that's really bothering me is that people will come at me with their stories and they'll be like, hey, can you put this on Vic's show? Well, first of all, I can't just call you up and go, hey, Vic, I'm going to talk, so listen to me. And these people want their stuff on the show, so just push it through. You know, you don't work for me, you know? And so I tell people politely, I'm like, look, the first thing you should do, if you're able to speak and say the encounter yourself, then you should go to Vic. And if you don't feel comfortable going on, because a lot of people won't do it. They just won't get on the radio and talk, you know, and they'll say, well, I really want you to tell my story. And then you're like, okay. And then when they give you the story and it's like 5 seconds long, like this one guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but he saw one behind a theater. There's a bunch of woods back there. I know exactly where it's at, but he said that he saw one. Well, he had a fellow employee that she claimed she saw it too, but she didn't feel like talking about it. And he wanted me to like make sure that it was on your show. Well, how am I supposed to present that as a story? See, because if you get like 50 stories, you might get 5 to 10 that are show worthy. And you know that. You know, you'll have a bunch of them that are just like, yeah, a guy saw one run across the road when he was with his wife. Somebody saw one crouched down behind a bush. They think it's a dog man or who knows what it is. But those are not, you can't turn those into shows. So when I told this guy, I said, hey, I really don't think I can. He was like, well, why don't you tell Vic and let him decide? And I said, why don't you tell Vic and let him decide? Because I already know the answer and I'm not going to speak for you, Vic, but I could already tell you you're not going to use it. Dude, it's like a paragraph. And this guy got genuinely aggravated and was like, well, I think that's bullcrap. And I'm like, well, you know what? I think your citing is too short, you know, and you're trying to pressure me into doing it and calling me names through the email, whatever. That's bullcrap. So some people, they've made comments to me about, well, I think your stories are too crazy, this and that. No, the only thing that I do is I get stories, and it might take me a while. It might take me several months to put together a good bevy of show-worthy stories. And if I get enough good ones, me and Vic will talk, and I'll tell you what I got. And you say, yeah, you know what? Let's tell those. Because, like I said, you might get 10 stories. You might get 1 or 2 that are worth putting out on a show. Because people want to hear good stories. If I'm going to come on here and talk and tell people's encounters, people that don't want to voice it themselves, people are going to want to hear a good encounter or something that was frightening. You know, especially being October. That's why we chose to do it in October, because this is the spooky, scary month. I've collected some really good ones. But remember, folks, for every one story that I tell on here today, there were 3 or 4 that didn't make the cut. And if yours were one of those, I sincerely apologize. I wasn't trying to be rude. I didn't cut you out or leave you out because I'm a mean guy or I'm a jerkhead or anything like that, you know. Now, I did do something a little different on this show. There's about 3 or 4 of these that are going to be from Texas, and the other ones I went out of the state a little bit. Now, I don't usually like to go out of the state because I don't like to step on people's toes. But this time, there were a couple that were too good to pass up. So I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely going to hang on to those, and I'm going to tell those on Vic's show. So I got these stories together, and I don't like to come on the show unless I got something. You know what I mean? I got to have something to bring to the show. I want to come on the show, and I want to tell a story with some substance, something that's going to grab you and go, wow, Because in my mind and what I believe, these things, they're dangerous creatures. And there's an opinion that a lot of people believe these things are evil. Now, I don't know if I believe that. I try to reserve judgment about that. But in my heart of heart, I never want to see one again because it scared me really bad. And I'm a big, strong guy. I mean, there's a lot of people on my Facebook, they know I'm a big dude. I'm a weightlifter. I'm a strong man. But there's no kidding myself into thinking that if something ever happened that I could stand a chance against one of these things. I don't recommend anyone messing around with this stuff. Now, if you're a researcher and you want to go out into the bush, that's okay. You do what you got to do. But it's not something that I will ever recommend to any normal person to go out there and mess around with these things, because that's not my thing. That's not my bag. But I know that a lot of people want to see it. A lot of it is just you want confirmation that it's real. Take my word for it, it's real. If you don't want to take my word for it, take the word of the eyewitnesses that come on Vic's show. Take the word of the people that told me these stories that scared them so bad that you're about to hear tonight.
All right, Josh, let's get into it. You've got several stories to share with us tonight. Please tell us about them.
Well, I think when me and you had talked, we got one from Canada. And I believe that that's the one that you wanted me to lead in with. That story, okay, there's a guy that I talked to. Now, I talked to him way back in the spring, probably early spring, March, something like that. He sent me a story, and I was reading through some of the different encounters and stuff, and this guy sent me a story. Now, he's from Canada. We'll call him Clint. It's close to his real name. He's from Saskatchewan. And if I remember correctly, I got to go back and look. I have a million things on my messenger, but he was actually in Quebec, I believe, that they were working. Now, he told me that they have these teams that they go out and when they do the surveying for the lumber companies, and they earmark trees and tree lines so you can cut this tree here, you can't cut that tree there. I'm assuming that's kind of what it was. He just said survey teams, and I'm adding to that because I think that's what it was that he was doing. But he said that they have these really big trucks that they drive, and now they're twice the size of a dump truck. Not all of them, but they have one that they use for work. It can plow through anything, but they're really slow, and they're humongous. And he said that this truck is big. You can lay down in the floorboard of it comfortably. He's 5'9", he said. He said that he could lay down in the floorboard of it comfortably. And so he said one night he was with 3 other guys, and 2 of them slept in one truck. They were one in front of the other because they didn't want to have to drive the 26 miles back to their camp. Now, going 26 miles back to camp, if you were at a regular place in a regular job, that would be nothing. But after they've been working 14-hour days, he said they've been on for 14 days straight, 13 to 14-hour days. He said exhaustion and then driving 26 miles is like a couple of hours through all that woods because of the trails that you have to go through. So he said that they decided to camp out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was the middle of nowhere. And he said that there were bears out. It was that season. They were roaming around at this time. He said it was summer and it was hot. And he said that it's that 1 or 2 months where it actually gets pretty hot in Canada. So anyway, he said they had the windows cracked a little bit, and he said that there were 2 guys that were sleeping in the truck behind him. He was in the truck that was in front of the other truck. Didn't have a pistol. All he had was a flare gun. The guys in the other truck had a rifle, and I believe it was a 30-06. I think that's what he said it was. And he said that when he was sitting there in his truck about 3 a.m, I thought that was significant because a lot of weird stuff happens around that time. That's odd that it's always like 3 a.m, you know. But he said it was around 3 a.m. He felt the truck shake, like the truck moved. Now, I asked this guy, when I finally was able to speak with him, I asked him, I said, how much do you think these trucks weigh? He said they weigh tons. I mean, it's like a lot. He said he couldn't tell me exactly, but he said that these are humongous trucks. You climb up a ladder to get up into the truck, about 6 feet, I think is what he said. And when you climb up into the truck, he's like, the truck doesn't move. He said, I weigh 250 pounds. The truck doesn't move when I get up in it. And he said he's a heavy-set guy. But he said that when he was laying in the floorboard of the truck, he feels the truck shake, like it moves. And he felt like something was on the side of the truck. So he sat upright and he looked out the window. And all he saw were 2 ears sticking up at one point, and then he heard like a sniffing sound. And when he looked out the window and he saw that, he thought, what in the world? What is this? He said it looked like wolf ears. But he said his first reaction was, it can't be a wolf. It's got to be a bear. But he knew it wasn't a bear. He's like, this had to be a wolf. And then like it was just a split second, and it lifted its head real quick, and then it was back down. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's a wolf. I just saw a wolf climb up onto the side of my truck. So he was in shock. So he was like, there's no way this is happening. How could a wolf climb up on? So then he felt it like go back down. Like he heard it jump down off the truck, the twigs snapping, the rocks, whatever. And he said that it went up the other side, which would have been the driver's side because he was facing the passenger side. And he said he looked over his shoulder and the first thing that caught his peripheral was a head in the window. And he said that he turned around and kind of got up in the seat, and he said that he saw this thing. It was blackish gray, and he said that it was standing on the side of the truck, and its head was directly in the window, and it was just staring at him. And I asked him about that, and I said, do you have the details? Can you give me any details? Because I know a lot of times when people are flustered and they see these things, they don't really have the details. It's like they escape you. I know that from experience. But he said that the one thing he remembers is the mouth was closed at that point. It was just looking at him. And he said it was just staring at him, like not blinking, it just staring at him. And he said it had like human eyes. And he said that he was just looking at it. It was looking at him. He could see it in the moonlight. Clearly, it was a full moon. And he said that its head was gigantic, that it covered up the bulk of the window. And he was like, what in the heck am I looking at? What is this thing? And he said he was stunned. He didn't know what it was. And he said that it lifted up its hand. Now, I asked him about that too. He said it had a hand. And he said that it kind of tapped the glass, like as if he was a fish in an aquarium. He said, I felt like a fish in an aquarium, dude. And he said it like tapped the glass and then it slid its hand up and it got its claws on the top of the window where it was cracked. And he said, now these windows are real thick, like inches thick, bulletproof glass. He said they're real heavy. And he said that this thing began to push down on it with its claws. And he said that once it started getting a little play in there where its fingers could come through, it started pushing more aggressively. And he said that he could see it grimacing. And he said the whole time, he goes, it stared me in my eyes. And he said, I had to look away. I didn't know what to do. He goes, I was terrified and I was frantically radioing to the guys in the truck behind me, just please wake up. Please, for the love of God, wake up. And this guy, his voice was cracking and shaking when he told me this. And we had to talk 2 different times because he couldn't finish what he was telling me. So, yeah, this guy was really upset. And I know that this wasn't bull crap. This guy, something really traumatic happened to this dude. And so this thing kept pushing down on the window. And he said that eventually it got to where the window was about partway, like where he could reach his hand in. And he said that he finally got a hold of the other guys and they woke up and this thing, he said at that point, it jumped down. And he said that he watched it in the back window kind of lope. Now, in my words, lope. I don't know how to describe it. He said it almost got down on all fours. And he said that the way it ran, it almost looked like a gorilla. But he said that it was definitely canine in origin. It had a tail. He said it was a short tail. And he said that it kind of ran toward the other truck. He said it kind of stood up on these weird-looking hind legs. The hind legs, he described them to me like they were the hawks, the backward bent hawk-like legs. But he said they were real short, which was interesting because sometimes people describe them as being long. And I think there's all kinds of different species or subspecies of these critters. I don't know. But he said that this thing, it debated about going up onto the other truck, but then it ran back to his truck and it went around back to the passenger side. And it got up in the passenger window and was looking at him. And he said, I debated about trying to make it to the other truck. He's like, but I didn't know what to do. He goes, I fumbled for the key box at that point. I was trying to get the flare gun out if I needed to. And he's like, I was getting ready to get in the truck and try to start it. He goes, I didn't know where I was going to go. The truck's so slow, Once I got out of the clearing, I would have just been trying to plow through trees. He goes, maybe I could knock it off because I didn't know what to do. But he said that finally one of the guys took him seriously and he looked out the window and he saw this thing standing on the side of his truck. And he said that this thing finally had jumped back down off the passenger side. This would have been the second time around, I guess. And it went and it got up onto the driver's side again and began pushing down on the window again. And he said at this point it got its arm through, got to the elbow and was trying to get down. He was almost to where it could unlock it, dude. Now, he said this thing was going for the lock and it was starting to kind of look down at the lock like that's what it was doing. And he was like, oh my God, this thing is trying to unlock the door. Like it had enough intelligence and it shocked him. He was like, this is not an animal. This is not a primate. This is not a canine. This is some sort of with human intelligence. Maybe primitive human intelligence, but it had intelligence enough that it was trying to unlock the door. And he said that At that point, he goes, dude, I almost fainted. He said, I got lightheaded. He said he felt like he had, like his brain was just going to shut down and he was going to collapse. And he said about that time he heard 2 gunshots, bang, and then another one, bang. And he said that thing stopped. And he knew that the guys behind him were taking a shot at it, which he had been telling them to do because he didn't know what else to do. And he said that the thing just kind of looked in their direction and jumped down and then kind of just walked into the woods slowly. And he said it didn't run. He said it just walked, looking back over its shoulder, just walking on its hind legs like it was pissed off. And he said that when they looked, one of them spotlighted in the other truck, they used a spotlight and they saw another set of eyes in the woods watching. And he said that he knew at that point that they had been hearing noises. They had been hearing things for days. He said, I knew what it was now. He said, and I quit. He goes, that was it. When I got back to the camp the next day, he goes, I was done. He's like, I never went back in the woods again. He said that the year was 1999, I think. 1998, something like that. It was toward the end of the millennium, whatever. This was not a recent encounter. This was, something that happened years ago, but the guy remembered it like it was yesterday. And he told me this story. He said he'd held it in for so long. And I guess his aunt listens to the show and said that he should tell you the story, but he didn't want to come on the show. So he told me. And so I'm telling you, but that's his encounter. That's the Canadian encounter. And I guess we'll move on to the next encounter. This one, there's a guy that likes the show. He's from my hometown, and his cousin had an encounter in Arkansas. Texarkana is a little town. It's literally right on the border in between Texas and Arkansas. That's why it's called Texarkana. Now, I don't know if anybody knows anything about history, but there was a serial killer there back in, I think, 60s. I think it was the late 60s. Don't quote me on that. Somebody will probably go, it wasn't the 60s. It was the 70s. I don't know. Just like the thing with the don't feed your dog grapes. Well, my dog always ate them. Never had a problem. Your dog got sick from grapes. I apologize. Everybody jumped on me about that. They key in on everything I say and they go, that's not correct. Well, this guy was a serial killer. He never got caught. But there is a movie that was made about this guy. It was called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. I watched it as a kid. Kind of creeped me out, probably because I watched it around Halloween and I was by myself. But it was about this guy who murdered all these people, and he got away with it, and they never caught him. And so, anyways, he wore like a gunny sack on his head. But that's the only thing I really know about this town. I've been through there a couple times when I've been on my way to Arkansas or on my way to Louisiana. I've been through that corridor. It's a little town right there on the border. This guy went out to hunt deer on a lease. They said it was north or northwest of Texarkana, something like that. He said he was out there on some land. He was hunting. And he kept feeling like there was something watching him when he was heading out to the stand. But he said once he got out there, he was out there about 6 hours. From the morning, he said he got there about 10 a.m. He was out there until like 4 in the afternoon or whatever time it was. And he said that he finally bagged a buck. It wasn't a real big one, but it was decent size. And he said that it was only about a mile from there to where his truck was parked. He went with another guy, and where their truck was parked, it was about a mile. So he walked back and he drove his truck to get as close as he could to the kill. And he said he had to drag it about 150 to 200 yards, something like that. But he said that once he got it back to the truck, this was very recent. He said it was last year. He said he texted his other cousin that he was with. And the guy said, well, I'm not ready to go yet. It's still mid-afternoon. He's like, I'm not done. And he said that he was tired. And he had been up for a while. And they had hunted the day before and the day before. So he said he was really tired. And he kept feeling like something was there watching him. It was making him uneasy. So he decided to take a nap. He figured he got his. He wasn't going to keep going. But his cousin hadn't gotten anything yet that season. So he wanted to stay longer. He was like, well, he'll probably be here a couple more hours, till dark. So he decided to take a nap. And he said that he woke up because he heard something hit the tailgate. And he said that at that point, he thought, wow, is there like maybe a deer or something bumping against my truck? That'd be fortunate. So he looked up in the rearview mirror and he said it was just getting dark. It had just gotten dark. And where he was at, there was a canopy of trees. There was a lot of trees. So it was already pretty much dark, but you could still see a little. And he said that there was something standing at the back of his truck. He could just see like some fur or something over the top of the tailgate. And he said that he heard the tailgate latch open. And he said that it began to move down, and he was like, this was unbelievable. He said he was looking at it in the mirror going like, is this really happening? My tailgate is literally being lowered, but I don't see anything. I just see like this poof of hair. And he said he flipped on the cargo light, and that's when he saw it. And he said this thing kind of ducked down like it was trying to hide, but he said that he caught a glimpse of the head, and he just saw this furry, poofy head. And when he told me that, poofy is the exact words he used, I asked him, what does that mean? You know, you said it was poofy. He said it was like if you took a chow dog. Now, this is what he told me. He said if you took a chow dog and you bathed it and then you like blow dried it, he said, because one of his ex-girlfriends had a little foo-foo dog. I forgot what kind of dog he said it was. He said, but it looked almost like a chow, but it had big pointy ears that stuck out, but the poof on the top of the head stuck out more than the ears. That's what he told me. And then the weirder thing about it was he said that it kind of ducked down behind the tailgate, and he was like, I wanted to get out and look. He goes, but I didn't know what the thing was. And he said, and it had a big head. He said, and it scared him. But then he said that he saw this weird looking arm. And he said that the arm was black, and it had these really white looking nails on it. And he said the nails looked like talons, like claws. And he said that he just saw one arm slide up real quick and just literally impale the deer's neck, like grab it by the neck. And then the other arm grabbed the thigh or whatever. And he said that he just saw it yank it. First it was one hand, then the other. And he said it just yanked it off the tailgate. And then he said it began to drag it really quickly out into the woods. He said he was staring at this the whole time. He said he had a pistol, but he did not want to shoot at this thing because he was just terrified. And he thought, why the f- am I still sitting here, you know? You know, and he said, he's like, I was stunned. He goes, I was too scared. He goes, my legs were shaking. He's like, you know, he goes, dude, I felt like I was going to throw up. And he said that this thing was so weird looking, dude. He said that the arms and legs were smooth. He said it was real black, like a black chow with poofy hair, but smooth looking black arms and legs. Like he said that the hair might have been just really short on the arms and legs. It was weird. He said it was almost like if somebody was wearing a fur coat, but like the best werewolf mask you could possibly imagine. He goes, I don't know what it was, dude. It was just so scary. And the hands, the nails were so long. He said it was so creepy. He goes, I don't know what it was, dude. He goes, it just didn't, he goes, I couldn't figure it out. He said finally he just took off. And then he texted his cousin and he drove out there to where his cousin was at and said, I'm on my way over there. And he described it to his cousin. His cousin looked in the back of the truck, saw the blood, saw that there was a deer back there, and was like, what happened to your kill? He said, this thing took it. He's like, we got to get out of here. There's some kind of weird creature out here. He told me it wasn't overly tall. He said it was probably about 6'3", 6'4". You know, he estimated. He said the legs were bent, but they weren't pronounced. You know, when I described to him the backward bent legs, he didn't recognize that. He said that it looked hunched over and its legs looked human-like almost, but like with weird-looking feet. And he just said, I don't know how to describe the feet. They're like pawed feet, but kind of big, you know. He's like, that's the best I could see of it. You know, he goes, my head, I was turned looking at it when he was pulling it away. And he said it never took its eyes off of me. And he said that it opened the tailgate. I mean, I don't know what to make of that story. That story's crazy. But that was my Arkansas story. And I apologize to everybody because my voice is kind of, I just got over a slight illness and my voice is kind of messed up here. But I got another one. Now this one is out of Norway. I'm getting out all the out of state stories first. Now this guy, and I have permission to use his story, but I didn't ask permission to use his name, but I'm sure he'll know who he is, was kind enough to share his story with me. He's a guy from Germany. His family has a vacation home in Norway. And his story, and I know that when me and you talked about it, it was pretty crazy. So anyways, this guy's story, he was up in a vacation home in Norway near a lake. Now, the name of the town was Evie. It's E-V-J-E. I don't know how to pronounce it. Evie or Evie or I don't know how to pronounce that. My nephew was trying to tell me how to pronounce it. I don't know. But anyway, this was a family vacation home. And he said that the nearest neighbors were like 5 miles away. And he said that they were rarely there. So if anything happened, nobody can hear you scream. I mean, he's pretty much on his own. And I really sympathize with this guy. It was scary what happened to him. He said he went out on the deck to take a smoke. And he said that while he was out there, it was about the second or third day, I think he said, he saw this strange looking hairy creature dragging a moose by the lake by its neck. And he said that when he was out on the deck, I guess he made some noise and it looked at him. It saw him. And he said that it stopped what it was doing and just stared at him. And he thought, oh my God, what on God's green earth am I looking at here? What is this thing? And he said that he said it was only about 6 foot tall. You know, he said 250, 300 pounds, bulky, but not overly bulky. But it was short. It wasn't like the big, just like the Arkansas encounter. It wasn't a real big creature, but it had a menacing face on. He said it was terrifyingly ugly face. And he said that this thing just stared at him. And then it kind of walked into the bushes around the other side of his cabin. And he thought, oh my God, where's it going? And then he said it let out this howl, like a blood curdling howl. And he said that it just shook him to his stomach. It scared him so bad. He went back in the cabin. And he barricaded himself in the cabin. He said he barricaded the windows and the doors, and he just sat there by the front door with an axe. Because that's all he had. He said he went to the utility closet and he grabbed an axe. And he said he sat there all night just smoking cigarettes, turned off all the lights so it couldn't see in, you know, barricaded himself in there as best he could. And he said he was too scared to try to make it to the car to get away. And he said he just sat there with the only light coming from the fire going inside of a wood burning oven. And he said that that was all he had. And he just sat there all night with an axe. And he said that all night long he heard bellowing howls and shrieks coming from the woods and the shaking of trees and bushes. And this thing was like just making a noise, like it knew he had seen it. And it wasn't happy. It was angry. And he said that he heard it running up around the house, around the cabin. And he said he was just petrified. And his phone got no service out there. So he's like, dude, it was the most terrifying night of my life. He goes, I didn't know what to do. I was stuck. And I thought about that, and I thought, oh, my God, can you imagine being by yourself, by a lake, in the middle of the woods? There's nobody else around. What can you do? I mean, you have an axe. That's all you got. And this creature is out there, and it's pissed off. So I really felt bad for this guy. He said the next day, he went to town, and he filed a report, whatever, and he said he went back to the cabin because he didn't have service. Well, some detectives finally came out there to talk to him. He said that he didn't speak Norwegian like they do, like not real good. But he said that they were kind of talking back and forth. They weren't laughing at him and they weren't making fun of him. They were just speaking back and forth. And he said that they acted like they might have actually believed him, but he wasn't for sure. And that they were just kind of like, yeah, well, nothing we can do. He said that they didn't even bother writing anything down or anything. They just came out to look and then they just left. And then, you know, I guess the next day he packed up and he left. So that's his story. So that's the story from Norway. And that is my stories from outside of Texas. Those are the 3 stories I had from outside of Texas. Now we're going to get into Texas. I'll start with a story from Lake Travis. Now, I had a friend of mine who worked for the Colorado River Authority down there in Austin. Now, these guys are security, but they're police officers too. Now, what it is they have to go through TCLO certification to become cops. This guy that I'm going to tell you about, I went with him and a friend of mine to interview him. I met him from a friend of a friend. Now, this guy's story, we'll call him Kevin. It's not his name, but we'll call him Kevin. He is still in law enforcement. He's relocated to another state because of what happened to him. Now, on his route, he had a patrol route that he would do near the lake. Now, this is about 10, 12 miles outside of Austin. Now, it's in between, I'll just say the location, in between Lakeway and Cedar Park. Anybody knows the Austin area, it's out there. There's a wastewater treatment plant. There's a couple of them out there, actually, but there's one of them in particular where he went to every night to do his rounds. And he said that on this particular night, he opened the gate, opened the fence. He went in to check and do the D-Tex. They have a D-Tex they have to click, and it goes beep, and then it lets you know that, and we have that too, to let you know that you've hit the property, and they can send a computer printout. Tells them that you were on the property. They can't say, you weren't there, you didn't do it. No, I was there at 3 o'clock, and this is what happened. Well, he said that he was walking around the property. Said he walked around the property and was almost done with his patrol, got around the other side of the property, and there leaned against the back wall what he first thought was a dog, and then he saw like arms or a hand dangling down, and he thought, what is that? Is that a man? And then he realized, he said it was hairy, and he had like a weird-looking arm. And he thought, first thought he said he thought was a Bigfoot. It was Sasquatch. He goes, dude, it's real. You know, it's sitting right there. He said, then it lifted up its head. And he said that when it lifted up its head, he said, Wolf, he's like, I've never seen something so hideous my whole life. He said this was the ugliest creature. He said it looked like something that crawled out of hell. He said it lifted up its head and its teeth. It just opened its mouth like it yawned. He said every tooth was sharp. He said it just looked like a mouthful of razor blades. And he said that it unfurled itself. Now, that's his exact words. He said it unfurled itself and it leaped up to its feet and was immediately standing up. He said it was 8 feet tall, at least. And he said he was standing there, and he said he drew out his pistol because when he first saw it, he drew his pistol out because he didn't know what it was. And he said that he knew immediately that that gun, that Glock, was not going to do anything to this creature. And he said that, dude, he goes, even to point it at the thing, I was terrified. And he said it didn't run immediately. It just looked at him, took a couple steps, and just kind of pushed its chest up and out. And he said that it threw its arms back and, like, pushed its chest out like it was getting ready to howl. And he said it cracked, that there was a popping, cracking noise. And he said he didn't know what that was. A lot of times when these things go from all fours to upright, I've heard that before. But he said that the noise, and I asked him about that, and he said that the noise happened when it popped its chest out. He said it was like poofing itself up like, look at me, look at this. And he looked me dead in my eye. Now, a couple times he had to stop and go outside. We were in a coffee shop down in Austin, and he just, I don't know, man. I felt kind of bad because I kind of kept pressuring him to finish, and I've done that before with people, and sometimes sometimes I feel bad. I mean, I don't want to be pushy, but this dude was starting to aggravate me because he just didn't want to finish the story. And I felt like guilty because I was like, dude, hurry up, tell me this, but I needed to know, and I wanted to be able to get this story, and it really got to him. And I had waited about 6 months to get the story from him in person when he came back to town because he still has a lot of family here. And so him meeting with me was nice that he was willing to do that. So I met him in person. But anyways, this thing, he said it unfurled his chest, and then he said it took 2 steps and leaped onto a 10-foot barbed wire fence, and it like jumped onto the fence and then just kind of somersaulted over it sideways. He said it was unreal. He said it was like Spider-Man. He said it got into the woods, ran right into the woods and disappeared. He said then he turned and he looked down and his legs were shaking. He was like, he didn't know what the sound was. He said my teeth were chattering. That's never happened to me in my life unless I was cold. And he said it wasn't cold when this happened. I think he said it was late September or early September, something like that. But he said that this thing leaped over the chain link fence like Spider-Man. And he said that at that point, it roared out of the woods. Now, this is what he told me and the witness that I was with. He said that the trees shook. And I thought to myself, that's, But in his mind, it probably did. Because that's how scared this guy was. And he said he looked down and he had urinated himself. And he said that this thing stunk. He said it smelled like garbage and like urine, wet dog. It was really bad. And he said that the thing that really got him about it was that he could feel the sound from this thing's roar. And I asked him now, I said, hey, did it howl or did it roar? He said, dude, the thing roared. He said it was like, roar, and he said that it was so loud that it echoed off of the lake, off the hills around the lake. Because I know that area where he's at. I know exactly where I've been there. I went and I checked that place out. Now, I drove through there. Me, I'm going to go look around because I'm not one of those people from Scooby-Doo that wants to investigate, gang. No, I'm not going to do that. I drove by and I said, well, there it is. And I drove. So I know the location of where this was at. And now my mom's company that she used to work for actually was one of the people that built these water treatment plants. So I knew where it was at. But he said that it roared and he could feel it in his chest. And he said that it was the most terrifying thing. And he said that the next 2 days he called in sick. And then eventually he went back to work. He tried to. He couldn't do it. He said he was missing. He wouldn't stop at that place. He wanted to get transferred to another route. He said it was a good paying job, but he just couldn't do it. And eventually they let him go. And he moved away. And he moved to another state. I feel bad for the guy. He said before that he liked to go fishing out on Lake Travis. He said it was something he liked to do. He said, but after that, he just couldn't do it. And that was it. He moved and I feel bad for this kid. And I also feel kind of bad about pushing him, Vic, but I wanted to hear the story and I wanted to get it. It was just hard to sit there with somebody who breaking down, you know. But there's that story. The next story we're going to go to another lake. Now, this story, there's a guy that I knew since I was in elementary school, and this happened to his uncle's best friend. Now, I'll give you a little backstory to this one. It's called Lake Stamford. You can look it up on a map. It's not a huge lake, but it's the lake, and it's between Stamford and Anson, which is right outside of Abilene. The biggest town around there is Abilene, Texas. Abilene's a really cool, rustic town. I always liked Abilene. My dad always worked at power plants, so we lived out in Haskell, Texas. Now, in my hometown of Haskell, there was a legend, and I always, as a child, thought of it as a Bigfoot, like some sort of Bigfoot creature. I lived there till I was like in 3rd or 4th grade. I guess we left. But it was called the Haskell Rascal, and I'm sure you can look it up. This creature was always described, I always thought it was like a Bigfoot, but apparently it's like a short-muzzled dog man, because the more research I've done into it, some of the old accounts of it talk of it as a wiry-looking, kind of skinny dog man type creature, not a Sasquatch. And it has a muzzle, but it's kind of a short muzzle. It's weird. And I know it's got these pointy ears. It's got to be a dog man. So I was really, really curious when I put the word out, the last time that I was talking to my friend from my childhood. And he said, you know what? I do know somebody who had an encounter. And he said it was my uncle and his friend. Well, eventually he got back with me because I kept kind of hounding him about it. But eventually he got back with me and he said, dude, it wasn't my uncle. It was my uncle's friend. My uncle knows the story. Tried talking to his uncle. He couldn't really tell me a whole lot. So he got me in touch with his friend, which took a while. And then when I began to talk to this guy, his accent was so thick. Now, I'm from Texas, guys, and y'all know some people think I have an accent. Some people say I don't. I have a little bit of a drawl. I've worked on it. I live in Austin. It's very cosmopolitan here. There's not most people in Austin. When people come to Austin, they're like, wow, you guys don't really talk like you're from Texas. But most other places in Texas, they do talk like this. Well, this guy's accent was so bad, it was hard to try to talk to this guy. And, it's also hard to talk to somebody who's trying to watch a NASCAR race. That was another thing that was aggravating about this dude, because he wasn't overburdened with an abundance of education, obviously, and he was kind of aggravating me, but I stuck with it, folks. I got you the story. But anyway, I let him go a couple times and finally got back to him when he wasn't fighting with his family or whatever he was doing. They had some kind of meatloaf dispute going on. I don't know. Anyways, I finally got this guy to tell me his story. And then he asked me what it was for, and I told him that I collect these stories and that if I could use it on the air. He said, I don't give a crap, whatever. So, anyways, guy's name is Wade. Doesn't care if I use his name. Anyway, this happened out of Lake Stamford. Him and his buddy were out on their boat fishing. And it was near dusk. They made that perfectly clear that it was near dusk, that it was almost dark, that it was 8 o'clock in the summertime. He told me this very many times that that's when it was. So I know that much. And then he told me that they were in a shallow cove on the east side of the lake. They were on the east side of the lake near a shallow cove. And he said that on that part of the lake, they had kind of hunkered down and they heard a splashing noise, something like kind of like moving, jumping around. And now there's people that live close to the lake. And I mean, maybe it was somebody's dog, they thought. And they said that when they looked on the edge of that little inlet, he said they saw something splashing. So they moved the boat closer. They had the engine off, so they just kind of let it drift over there, or they pushed it or whatever. I don't know exactly how they got there, but he told me that they moved the boat over there. They didn't turn the engine on. So he said that they got up close to it, to where they were within about 40 yards of it. And he said that they knew at that point that it wasn't a dog. They didn't know what it was, but they just sat there observing it for a few minutes. And then he said that this thing kind of flipped around like it was trying to catch fish or something. And he said that the water was pretty shallow at that point, that it was during the drought. And he said that when they drifted closer and closer, the thing took notice of them. And he said that at that point, they realized just how shallow the water was because this thing stood up. And he said when it stood up, it was just up to about where its knees were. So I couldn't confirm the legs. I couldn't confirm what kind of dog man this was, what this thing was. But the close proximity to Haskell, anything in that area, it's the rascal. It's what they call it. this thing stood up and then it just kind of stared at him. He said it was just covered in mud. It was ugly as heck. And he said that the face of this thing, and he described it, it had a muzzle, kind of a short face. He said he saw it turn its head side to side and look around. And he said that when it saw him, it stood there for a minute, and then it just started to run toward them, like coming toward them in the water. And that it eventually got to where the water was a little bit deeper, and it started to swim quickly toward them. And he said that they were starting up the boat, and they were trying to get the heck out of there. And he said that the boat had a pretty good engine on it, so that they outpaced it. They began to get out of there. And he said, but at its closest, it probably got within maybe, 15 yards of them. And he said that he goes, I was so scared. He goes, I thought, man, this thing is going to get up on our boat. It's going to capsize us. It's going to drown us. It's going to kill us. He said, I didn't know what it was going to do to us. Now, he said that this thing followed them all the way across the lake. He said they got to the other side of the lake. He said that they pulled the boat up onto the shore. They ran to the truck, which wasn't far from where they pulled the boat up. And he said that this thing was still pursuing them. And he said that when this thing had first gotten into the water, I forgot to tell you about this part. When he first got into the water, he said that this thing was making a guttural grunting noise. Now, I told you about that, Vic. And he said that the thing was going like, that's the best way that he could describe it. And I'm trying to reenact it the best way that he told me. And he said that when it did that after it was about halfway across the lake, he started to hear an answer from different sides of the lake, that there was more of these things. And like he heard one across the lake and another one on the other side where they were headed. And he thought, oh my God, this thing's calling friends. And he said that then he began to hear these weird shrieking howls coming from the wood, the little bit of wood area where he was at, when he got up onto the shore. He said there was some brush right there, and he said he heard it coming out of the brush. And he thought, oh my God, we're going to get attacked. We're going to be driving out of here. This thing's going to attack us. He said, we just left the boat. We just left it there and we just burned off. And he said that eventually he looked back in the rearview mirror and it was just starting to get up out of the water. Like he could see it clearly. And he said that one thing he remembered about the face of this thing was that he don't remember which side of the face it was, but he said he remembered part of the muzzle of the thing being kind of ripped or torn. He said that you could see more of the teeth on that side, like there was something that had happened to its face, like it had been in a fight or something. That's what he said. And he said this thing looked freaking just gnarly. That was his exact words. He said it was the weirdest, gnarliest looking creature. He said, I don't know what that thing was, dude. And I said, did it bring to mind a werewolf? He said, a werewolf or just a hairy devil. He said it was just something out of a comic book. That was his description of it. And who knows with this guy what kind of comic books he's reading. But anyways, that's his description of it. And that happened at Lake Stanford. So if anybody knows where that's at in Texas. Moving on down the list here, I got another story for you, Vic. This one came out of Dallas. Now, this is a security guard that a former security guard that I used to know got me in touch with this guy. He had an encounter. This happened in 2015. And he said that it was in a subdivision near Dallas. He was working for a very large company at that time, or maybe he still does. I don't know. But he said that he had a patrol route and that he had a trainee. And he said that they were having problems on one of the subdivisions with vandalism. Now, he said it had been raining a lot and that he had gone into one of the buildings the last night before he had his trainee. He said they went into one of the buildings and that he almost stepped in what he thought was dog crap. But he said that this was a humongous pile of dung. Like he was like, that's the biggest scat I've ever seen in my life. Not his words, mine, but he said that it was huge. And he was like, oh my God, what kind of Great Dane or what is that? And he said that the building, they were all shells at that point. They had the Tyvek wrap on them, just the shell. None of the drywall was put up. But he said that something had been in there because he said it smelled like a wet dog mixed with pee and maybe blood. Because he said he smelled iron in the air, and I'm thinking maybe that's blood. I don't know. That's my words, but he said it smelled like urine, wet dog, and garbage. That's classic. Now, I did lead him a little bit. I asked him, I said, did you smell like a rotting smell? He said, yes. So it wasn't like he just came out and told me that. I asked him because I wanted to know, because I need to know if these people were being honest. So anyways, he tells me this story. He said that was the last night that he was without a partner. And he said that he walked out of the building and he was thinking, man, I don't know what kind of dogs are coming up in here. But there had been reports that there was some broken lumber and some beams had been snapped. So they thought vandalism. Maybe bums were going in there sleeping and just being drunk and tearing stuff up. They didn't know. So he had a partner. He was training him for the routes because he hadn't had a day off in 2 weeks, he said. So he was glad to have a guy that was going to train. So they went through that same subdivision out on the edge of town. I think he said it was northeast of Dallas. And he said that they went into one of the buildings and they were checking it, and then they heard a noise in the next building. He said, maybe there's something over there. He said, well, I'll check this building, you check that building, because they didn't know exactly where it was coming from, but they heard a beam of wood or something fall. So he went into the next building. The partner went into the other building. And he said that the partner was in the other building and he heard him scream, just scream. And he said he saw him come running out of the building and just was running toward the truck and was like, we gotta go, we gotta go. And he's like, why? So he kind of walked out of the building slowly, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why we were running. He looked in the window and he saw this brownish black creature standing there looking like hunched down, I guess, to look out the window. And he said that it looked like a werewolf, like a literal werewolf was standing there looking at him. And he thought, I am staring at a werewolf. He's like, there's no other way to describe it. This looks like a quintessential werewolf. Quintessential, my word, but that's what he said. He said it just looked like a classic werewolf. And he said that he just ran to his truck. They got in the truck. It was raining and they took off. And he said that they got down the street. They pulled into an IHOP and they called the police. They told them that they think maybe there was some homeless people there because they didn't know what to tell the cop. And they had decided that they weren't going to tell the cop that they saw a werewolf. So they called police and the cop was like, okay, we'll go check it out. Nothing came of it. I guess they didn't find anything. But he said that they'd spent the night talking about it all night. And he said that the partner told him part of it that night, but then the next day, when they were going back out to do their patrol, they had talked about it, whether they were even going to go and do it. And he said they both agreed they needed the job, but that they weren't going to stop and look inside that. They were just going to drive through. And he said eventually they lost that account because the guards quit checking in those places. And whatever it was continued to be a menace, I guess, and destroy things. What I suspect was that this thing had taken up residence there while it was raining, maybe just to get out of the rain, and it was laying in there. But here's what his partner told him, and this is what he told me his partner said. He said that as he walked into the building, he said he smelled that nasty wet dog, that dank wet dog smell mixed with like garbage or whatever. And he said that he knew right then, he said that it just hit him that there was something there. And he said that he heard a snoring, like something was snoring. And he thought, oh my God, there's bums in here. There's homeless people in here. His exact words were like, he thought there were a couple bums in there or something. But he said it was loud, that he could hear almost like a heartbeat. And he thought, dude, there's this, whatever this is, it's big, it's a big person. And he said he yelled security and he shined his flashlight toward the back behind a pile of lumber. And he said that this thing, he saw an arm first come up and then a head pop up. And he said that when the head popped up, he got the shock of his life because it was a wolf's head. And he said it was gigantic, dude. He said this thing's head was giant, dude. And he said this thing just kind of leaped up to its feet and just was kind of crouched down. And he said that it was like crouched down behind the lumber with both of its arms on top of the lumber, leaned forward like it was sniffing the air. And it just stared right at him. And he said its shoulders were bristled up and it was hiked up like a dog that was getting ready to pounce. And he said that it began to peel its lips back and like a growl. And that it began to growl at him. And he said at that point he thought, oh my God, this thing is about to attack me. I'm about to be killed in this building. So he said at that point he turned and he ran out of the building and didn't look back. And he said that that's when I guess the partner came out and he saw it in the window. But that was pretty terrifying. And he said that they went over it. He said that he didn't give them all the details the first day, but the next day he remembered more. And he said that they went over the story about 10 times. He's like, I just didn't know what to make of it. I don't know what it was. But a guy that I knew from security knows that I collect these stories about the paranormal. And I tell you what, Vic, if anybody's listening, when my show gets going, I got a lot of stories from security guards that aren't just Dogman related. There's a lot of stuff out there. Let me tell you, there's some weird stuff, man. Like I was telling you, Vic, gargoyles. I got a couple stories that could be vampires. I don't know what they are, but just weird stuff that's been told to me over the years, man. People that have confided in me and they've told me some really scary stuff, dude. I mean, like, let me tell you.
Well, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm ready to get it going here. This story came out of Westlake. I'm going to go back to Austin here, my hometown here. My second hometown. My hometown's Taylor, but, Austin's my home. So this guy, I don't know this kid personally, but he knew that I was from Austin and he gave me his story. Now, it's kind of a short one, but it's pretty crazy. He was coming back from the theater one night, the Paramount, him and his girlfriend, and they live out in Westlake. He was young, still lived with his mom and dad and his girlfriend. They were driving back to his girlfriend's house. She was 20. He was 19 when this happened. So they were young. They're still living at their parents' house. Now, he said this happened a few years back, but he said that his mother had an encounter of this weird-looking creature that she observed while she was jogging, which is really scary. She was jogging, and then up in them back hills over there, nobody's thinking, hey, there's a Bigfoot or a Dogman or a gargoyle out there. Nobody's thinking that someone's going to jump out and attack you. You're just going to go run. It's a beautiful place, and people are going to go and jog and hike and do what they do. Austin is a very fit city. It's a very scenic city. People like to exercise. They like to exercise outdoors. Nobody's thinking that there's something out there. Well, there is. So she was jogging along. As she was jogging, she heard kind of a splash down in the creek bed. She looked. She saw this thing sitting on the edge of the creek, and she said it was gray. She said it was probably about 6.5 feet tall because it stood up, and it just stared at her. And she said that it looked just like a timber wolf standing on its hind legs with like shoulders. The front paws were kind of like hands. And she said that she just kept running. She just pretended like she didn't see it, and she sped up and took off running. And she said it didn't move. It just kind of watched her. And she looked back a couple of times, and it was just still there. And she said there were cars going by, too. But you would have to look down in that gully or whatever to see that this thing was there. But he said that him and his girlfriend were coming back from the Paramount one night. I don't remember exactly. He's still a young guy, so I don't remember what it was. I think he said that they had gone to see a comedian or something, Jim Gaffigan or something. So anyway, they were coming back. And he said that his girlfriend was like, oh, my God, what was that? And she said he looked, and this thing stepped out in front of their SUV and was just about to run across the road when he thought, we're going to hit it. And then he said it just kind of leaped backwards, like just jumped back. And he said they slammed on the brakes and were kind of turning or whatever. Now, I told him, I said, and I know this because I hit a deer not too long ago. And I said, dude, you don't swerve. Don't ever do that. If you're going to hit the dog, man, you're going to hit it. He said, dude, if it was a deer, I would have just kept, but he goes, this thing, I didn't want to hit it. He goes, it was gray, like the color of a gray wolf, like a timber wolf, with a big head. It had the classic legs. He said it had the backward legs like a dog has. And he said it jumped back. And he said that he looked, they had kind of slid and then they got back control. And they just both looked over to the right and they saw it standing there and it just kind of backed up to the tree line. It was just staring at them. And it had its arms like out in front of it. And he said that as soon as they saw it, it just kind of like hid. And then they turned around the curve right there. I know exactly where it's at. I've been to that spot. It's like a curve, And he said that then they saw it just kind of get down on all fours and run across the road. He goes, but it was on its hind legs. He said that for a couple days after that, he would smell this weird, like musky smell, as he described it, like a wet dog, like it was around his house. Now, that was weird because he said that it seemed like this thing knew that it was him that did it, and maybe it was his imagination, like he even admitted it. I said, maybe you were just imagining that this thing was after you. He goes, I don't know, man. He goes, I'd go out on my deck and I'd feel like the thing was there in the tree line watching me because I had seen it. My mom had seen it. And then he goes, and then I found out a few months down the road that another neighboring family had seen it too. So there's that story. For the next story, I'm going to take you to my hometown. This one happened. I had two of them from my hometown, but I can't give you both of them because the one person, she doesn't want the story being told, and I'm going to respect that. She gave me the story, but I can't tell you. It's like putting handcuffs on me, and especially with me because I like to talk. I got a big mouth. So here goes. This story now, this girl that told me this story, went to high school with her. Well, she's a little older than me. I think I would have been like a freshman when she was a senior, but She really don't remember me when I was a freshman, but she knows who I am. She knows my family and everything. But anyways, they lived out on the edge of town. It would be in the south side of Taylor. And she said that her mother, kind of sad, her mother was an abused woman and her dad was an alcoholic. He would get drunk and he would hit her. And so one night the mom had had enough and they decided to leave. They had to leave in the middle of the night because he was on one of his binges and he was beating her. And so she got out, she grabbed the kids and they ran him. Now it was just her and her little brother. And they were walking across a bridge that goes across this place called Mustang Creek. When they were walking across that bridge, of course the mom's crying, they're crying. It's a traumatic thing. It's sad, broken families. They got halfway across the bridge and the little brother, I guess, was looking down into the creek and he says, "What is that?" Now she said that they turned all at the same time and they see this black shape. At first they didn't know what it was. It was just a black shape down in the creek bed. She said that when they stared at it a little closer, she said that her little brother had a flashlight, but it wasn't a real good one, but it illuminated it enough to where they could see that it was using like its hand to lap water. But she said the odd thing was it looked like a wolf. It was black or smoky black gray, the same exact description as mine. Might have been mine. Who knows? Right around the same time. And she said that it was really tall, probably about 7 feet tall because it stood up for a minute and then got back down. And she said it kind of crawled around in a circle and then it began to jog toward the bridge. So then they're standing there and they're like, oh my God, they just left this horrible situation to go to her aunt's house. And now they're having to run and they're dropping their clothes and everything else. And this thing gets to the bridge. And she said it was about 15 to 20 feet. I know where that's at. Now, depending upon which part of the bridge you're on, it's about 20 feet at its highest, maybe 15. You go further down, it's about 10, and so on and so forth. But she said that it ran toward the middle of the bridge, and she said the next thing you know, this thing is up on the bridge, and it's running behind them on the sidewalk. And she said you could hear the footfall like slap, slap, slap on the ground. And she said that it was shaking the ground. It was so heavy. And she said this thing probably weighed 400 or 500 pounds. She said it was just enormous. They turned around and you could see it. Like she said, you could just see it. And she said that it was, I think she said it was wintertime. I'm not for sure what time of the year. I had it written down, but I can't find the note on it. But she said that you could see its breath. And she said that it was just a horrifying creature. And she said that it was like you could hear it breathing, and she said that when you look back, the eyes were glowing red. They were red. I said, are you sure they were red? She said, absolutely. This thing's eyes were red. And she said it was coming toward us. And she said that you could see the chest heaving. She said it wasn't even that far away, but she said that luckily the aunt's house was just right there. And when they got into the neighbor's yard, they were screaming and crying and the neighbors came outside. And she said this wasn't but like 9 o'clock at night. And she said that the aunt and everybody came out and they ran in the house and they were looking out and they didn't see it. They don't know where it went. She said that she thinks it veered off, but she said that it got pretty close to him. And she couldn't even tell me exactly how close because in her mind it was so terrifying. And so anyway, that was her story. And I had been trying to get a good time to talk to her and I finally was able to get this story from her. That was a pretty terrifying encounter. And now I know what it was because she said that, I could tell you in person, it'd be better if I told you on the phone or whatever because she couldn't really relay it to me in a message. And then I have another story. Now this I wasn't even going to put on here, but this is a bonus story. And this is the last one of the night, guys. My voice is, I'm hanging in here with my voice. This happened in 1979 in a little bitty spot outside of my hometown called Nowak. Now, a friend of mine I grew up with, well, he was a lot older than me. He's about 10 years older than me, but I know him very well. And he told me this story. When he was a kid, I think he said in 1979 he was 10. So I guess he was born in 1969. He's, I guess, I'm trying to think, maybe 6 years older than me. So he told me that when he was a kid, and I made a special trip out there to talk to him in person, he said that him and his dad and his little brother were leaving Randy's ice house. And he said that, now this is what I found out, his little brother was in the passenger seat and his dad was in the middle seat. And he was driving. Now he said he was like 10, 11 years old. Now, that's not so unusual in these country towns. His dad got lit and was like, you know what, you drive, son. So he drove him home. Now, believe me, that happens. I've done that with my dad before. But they were driving out near Nowak, where he was from, out there in the country. See, at first I thought that he was in the passenger seat and his dad was driving, but no, I talked to him and he said, no, I was driving. So that's what happened. But he said that they were driving down these backcountry roads, and I know exactly where this place is at too. And he said his little brother pointed out the window and said, look, a dog. And when him and his dad and his little brother look out the window, they look a little closer and they see that this isn't a dog. This is some sort of weird looking creature crawling up underneath a barbed wire fence. Now, he said when a coyote or a coy wolf or a dog or anything, it kind of arches its back and kind of slides up under it. He said this thing looked like it pulled the barbed wire and was going through it or under it. He said he couldn't get a real good look to see exactly how it was doing it. But he said it came up from out of the barbed wire, and he said that it stood up. And he said that it was real stocky and that it was grayish looking, but he said that it could have just been illuminated by the light of the moon. And he said that when it noticed the truck, that it got down on all fours and began to head straight for him. And he said that the way the curves were, this thing was moving as the crow flies. So they were having to take the road, but this thing was cutting across. And he said that it was almost up to the truck. And he said that he began to speed up. And his dad was like, go, go, go. And he was like, I didn't want to go too much faster because I was going to lose control. I was a little kid. And he said that this thing got right up next to the truck and began to run on all fours, standing up on its hind legs and then back on all fours. And it was just looking in the window. And he said that it didn't have like a menacing look on its face. He said it looked like it had almost like a curious look on its face. Like when it was running alongside the truck, that it was looking in the cab and that it was almost like looking in. He said that its tongue was hanging out. You know how when a dog gets tired, its tongue is hanging out? And he said he was going about 45, 50 miles as fast as he could, trying to maintain control. And this thing was keeping up. But then he said that eventually they got down a straightaway and they just gunned it. And then it just kind of lost interest and veered off to the side of the road. And he said then it just stood up and he saw it like barking and howling and making noise. I don't know what that is. I mean, that could be a territorial thing. It saw them. It decided to chase it. I don't know. Dogs chase cars. I don't know. It was a weird story and he told me that. And so I tell you what, man, these are some weird creatures, dude.
Yeah, they definitely are. Well, Josh, I know your throat's hurting you. I just appreciate you coming on and doing this show tonight in your compromised state.
I got through it as best I could. I was using these throat lozenges, and I'm glad that we were able to put it together today so we can make a good show for Friday the 13th.
Oh, I'm glad you're able to do it too. Like I said, thanks again so much for coming back on the show and doing that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Vic.
Oh, anytime. Anytime you've got more stories, you know you're always welcome back. So, yeah, please do let me know.
It's always a lot of fun, man. I like being able to come on and get these stories out. It takes a while. People ask me over and over again, when are you coming back? And I don't want to come back with junk. So I try to get at least a good handful of stories that are going to come back and really grab the audience. Like, this is something. Because if you don't have that, then, I mean, why are you wasting your time with me when you can just interview eyewitnesses with juicy encounters? So I want to come back and I want to make everybody happy, you know, with the stories and get these out there, man.
Well, that's what you did. Yeah, there are a lot of people that are going to love listening to this. But like I said, thanks again so much for your time. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.